Hi and welcome to this video. My name is Richard Karsteken, and in this video I will be demonstrating on how you can connect your Oracle Cloud Infrastructure environment to your on-premise network. And we'll be doing that using a VPN tunnel, and on the back end we'll be having pfsense. So I'll start off from completely scratch without anything, and I'll demonstrate to you on how you can set this entire environment up. So what we'll be doing is we'll be creating in the Oracle Cloud our own virtual cloud network, and within that network we'll create 3 different subnets, each one for the availability domains, the different data centers that OCI is providing within a certain region. And I of course have my on-premise network, and we'll be connecting that using a VPN tunnel with the environment in the Oracle Cloud. And we're doing that over VPN, and on my backend side, my firewall / VPN appliance is pfsense. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with pfsense. I think it's a very commonly used virtual appliance for firewall, for VPN, and those kinds of things. You can download it for free. And in my environment, I'm running this as a virtual machine that actually connects my entire network to the internet. So that's what we'll be doing. And to start off, the first thing, of course, we'll have to do is I have a clean environment. I'll log into the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. And I have nothing in this environment yet. So the first thing we have to do, before we even can create virtual machines and all that kind of stuff, is to set up your virtual cloud network. So when I click on create virtual cloud network, I actually typically have 2 options here. I can create a virtual cloud network only, or I can create a virtual cloud network plus all related resources. Now in my case, I'm actually going to choose the first one, because if I create the second one, everything is done for me, but also everything is decided for me. In this case here, if I automatically create it, it creates a network of 10.0.0.0/16. Now, I already have a network like that running out of a different region, out of the Frankfurt region, using exactly that same IP network. And I already have a VPN set up to that network. So I, of course, won't be able to have 2 different virtual networks with the same IP range, and I cannot connect that to my on-premise environment because that literally wouldn't work. So I have to make sure that I can actually control what IP range I want to use, and I can do that by choosing that first option. So I'll give a name for my network. I'll call it the US network, as this is running out of the US in Phoenix. And instead of 10.0.0, I'll use 10.1.0.0/16 for my entire network. That gives me a large range of IP addresses that I will then subdivide in the different subnets for each individual availability domain. So that's it. I'll create this virtual cloud network. And the next step that I'll have to do is then within this network is create my individual subnets. So I'll create a subnet. I'll call it just sub1, and I'll put that into data center 1, availability domain number 1, and I'll give that 10.1.1.0/24. /24, sorry. I'll choose a default routing. It's a public IP address, label, default options for DHCP, and click on create. And this will create a subnet within this virtual network that allows me, at least for any virtual machine within the availability domain 1, to actually have a network that it can actually connect to. And I'll do this the same for subnet 2 and 3. So here we are. I have now 3 different subnets, 1 for each availability domain, the availability domain 1, 2, and 3, and each availability domain now has its own network subnets. And I can actually start creating virtual machines or bare metal instances inside these subnets as well. Now, of course, one thing I want to do is whatever I toss into these networks, I want it to have internet connectivity. So for this network, I actually will go to internet gateways, and I will create an internet gateway. Well, I'll just call it internet gateway or something like that. and it will create an internet gateway. And this will make sure that there is a router as part of this network infrastructure that allows me to route all the traffic to the internet so that these virtual machines can have internet connectivity. And that's actually how the VCN actually works. So if you look at my diagram here, within the VCN, I have now created those 3 different subnets, 10.1.1, 10.1.2, and 10.1.3 for each individual domain. And I have created the internet gateway so that this environment, anything that lives inside this environment, can actually connect out to the public internet. Now, for me to actually start creating a tunnel to my on-premise network, I also need something else, and that's called a dynamic routing gateway. And through the dynamic routing gateway, we can create a VPN tunnel, and that actually allows me to separately route traffic also to on-premise. Now, I'll come back to this, but what's key to understand is these are 2 separate entities. That means I can, for instance, create this private tunnel to my on-premise environment and the Oracle public cloud also without having an internet gateway. So if I don't want any of my virtual machines to have internet connectivity, I can still have that environment connected to my on-premise environment. So these 2 things, the dynamic routing gateway and the internet gateway, are 2 separate entities. They have no reliability on each other or something like that. So you can choose if you want to just connect to your on-premise environment and have a separate internet connection, or only want to have one of the 2. Now, before we actually can do anything and actually see if we can have connectivity, what would be useful, of course, is to have some compute instances. So let me actually create 2 basic instances. I'll call it Web01, and I'll toss one in active availability domain 1. I'm an Ubuntu fan, so I'll create an Ubuntu virtual machine. I'll provide it with my SSH key, and I'll connect it to the US network on subnet 1. That's no choice. As I'm deploying this to availability domain 1, it will automatically get deployed there, and it will create this virtual machine. And I will do this for a second virtual machine, and I'll put this into the second data center so that we have 2 virtual machines living in 2 different data centers in Phoenix. Give it again my public key, and I'll put it into sub 2. And we'll let these 2 provisions finish before we continue. So the instances have now finished provisioning. So now when I click on one of these instances, I actually will see now a private IP address within that network that I've created. And you'll see that there's actually a public IP address assigned as well. Now, of course, if I actually, from my machine, try to ping any of these numbers, if I see if I can actually connect from my local machine to that, of course, through the local network, I have no connectivity right now from my local network to the local network within OCI. But you also see that I can actually not ping the public IP address of this virtual machine by default. I'm not getting any response. Now that actually has 2 reasons. One reason is while we actually created the internet gateway for my network, there is an internet gateway, as you can see on that network. One thing you have to also manually create is a route that actually anything has to be routed through the internet. So within my VCN, I also have something called a routing table. I can click on the default routing table, and as you can see, there are no routes defined right now. So what I'll do is I'll add a new route rule, and it is the internet gateway route rule, and I will direct anything that's not in my local network, the entire internet, to my internet gateway. So now that we have that route, and again, if we now try to ping my virtual machine, you'll still see I'm not getting any responses. So the second thing that we actually need to do is also make sure that the security list for my VCN, and this is like my firewall table, is properly configured, that I actually am allowed to ping my virtual machine. Because by default, if I go to the security list of my VCN, you'll see that there's 3 different rules by default defined. One of them actually is that you are allowed to SSH into your environment, but I also want to be able to ping my environment, especially for troubleshooting and that kind of stuff. That's very useful. So you will see that there is already 2 actually ICMP rules defined. ICMP is the ping protocol. And right now it's only defining that only certain status codes are allowed to be sent back. And I don't want that. I want everything to be allowed to be sent back. So I'll change both rules into all and I'll save. And now if I see in my environment and the rule is applied, that I'll suddenly be able to now ping my virtual machine. So now we can clearly see, at least test that from my environment. If I click on my instances, I have my web01, that I, at least from the public internet, can now reach that virtual machine. Of course, one thing I can still not reach is the private IP address, because we have not set any up any of the stuff for the VPN connectivity. So let's do that. Let's do that now. If we again go back to the picture, so we have the different subnets. Within the subnets now we have two instances. One in each subnet we have an instance. We have the internet gateway set up. I have a default route that routes everything on the internet to my default gateway. I've set my security list that I'm allowed to ping up and down so that I actually can test my instances. Now the next step that we want to do is be able to actually set up a connection between my on-premise environment and my public cloud environment. And as you can see in this picture here, the first thing that we need to do is to set up a dynamic routing gateway for that. And after that, we can create a VPN tunnel. So in my environment here, again, I'll go to my networking and my virtual cloud network. Here we go, US cloud network. And you will see under the dynamic routing gateways, I don't have one yet. And I can actually not create one here. I can only attach one here. So I actually have to go to your standard networking option. If you go click here, networking, and I can click on dynamic routing gateways, and I can create a dynamic routing gateway. So I'll call it my gateway router or whatever. Give it a name. Doesn't really matter what name you gave it here. Give it here, and it's provisioning that. That takes some time. So here it is, and we now need to assign this to my virtual cloud network. So I can go to my virtual cloud network, dynamic routing gateway, attach a dynamic routing gateway. Yes, I want to do that. I'll select the dynamic routing gateway that I have just created, and I'll click on attach. So here we go. I have now my VCN with a dynamic routing gateway. Now the next step is that I can click on this. And before I actually can create my ipsec connection, there is one other thing that I actually have to do. I have to go to my networking and create something called a customer premise equipment. And here's actually where I'm stating that I actually have something not in the Oracle Cloud, but it's something on my side that I have to define as an object that I will be connecting my VPN tunnel to. So I'll call that my on-premise pfsense machine or something like that. And here I have to specify my public IP address of my local environment. And this is the public IP address that my VPN tunnel on my side actually is listening to. So I'll specify that address here, and I'll click on create. So now I have created an object. This is my object of my local VPN server that I have here. I'll show you that in a little bit. And I now can actually go again back to my dynamic routing gateway. And I can now create an ipsec connection. So I'll give it to on-premise, on-prem VPN or something like that, whatever name you want to give it. And I'll connect that to my on-premise pfsense environment. The only thing left for me to specify is what my IP range is that I have in my local environment. And that's in my case 192.168.1/24 network. And that's it. So this takes a little bit. It actually now spins off an environment that will actually be my VPN server that I then later can actually create the connection with my local VPN server. So let's wait until this is finished. So here we are. It is finished provisioning. It took about 7 minutes for the VPN service to actually be launched. And if I now actually click on here, I can actually click on the word tunnel information. If I click on the tunnel information, you actually see two tunnels that is actually created for the VPN. So these are a redundant configuration of a VPN server. And I have one public IP address here and one public IP address here. And this is how actually I can reach this VPN from my on-premise device. Now the key thing here to notice is the secret key. So I actually need to capture this, and I'll copy and paste that. And I'll actually come back to this, and I need the public IP address, of course, and on how I actually can reach this environment. So just to recap, if we look at this environment, we created the VCN, we created the subnets, we created virtual machines in the subnets. Separately, I created an internet gateway, so my machines have internet connectivity. But as I said, that's separately dependent on having a VPN. I don't need that. And I've set up the DRG, the dynamic routing gateway, and my VPN connection. Now I need to go into my own environment, my on-premise environment, and now configure everything from its side, so that it can also actually receive and open up the VPN tunnel through the cloud. So this is my local pfsense environment. So this is my local firewall / VPN running inside a virtual machine in my own environment. And if I click here on status on ipsec, you already see actually that I already have one VPN tunnel to the OCI environment in Frankfurt. So what we now need to do is to create another configuration for my environment that I've just configured connecting to Phoenix. So I'll go to VPN, ipsec, and I'll add a connection here. Most of the settings are pretty default correct. In my case here on interface, I need to specifically set up a IP address I want to communicate. I have 4 IP addresses that I have here, so I'll choose one of those. And I have to set up my remote gateway. So that's that IP address that was specified here. Remote gateway. I'll give it a name. I'll say it's OCI in Phoenix. There we go. And what I typically do is I also manually configure my identifier. So this is my own IP address. Because I have different IP addresses, I want to make sure it's identified as the right IP address. And my peer address is the one that I actually have here. There we go. Just making sure that's correct. And I have to enter my pre-shared key. So again, we'll go back here. We'll take the key that's defined here and add that in here. Now, besides that, everything else is pretty good on default. Encryption algorithm, the hash, none of that actually needs to be changed. And I'll click on apply. Now you'll see that nothing is still happening, and if I actually go to ipsec here, you see that the tunnel is disconnected, and if I actually connect, you see that it actually is not connecting yet. Because the second phase that I have to do is, now I've created the tunnel, but within this tunnel, I actually need to create a tunnel for the actual protocol that I want to run. In my case, I want to have an IPv4 tunnel in here. So I want to have an IPv4 tunnel connecting to my local subnet, which my router by default knows is 192.168.1. And I want to connect that to a remote network. And here I'll specify the network that I have created for my VCN. So that's 10.1.0.0/16. Just to recap, so that's that network that I actually have created for my entire VCN. So it will connect a VPN environment to my entire VCN server. It will know that the entire VCN network is behind it, including the 3 individual subnets for the individual data centers that I actually have. So specify that. I'll give it a name. So IP traffic for Phoenix. There we go. And again, everything is pretty well configured. My encryption algorithm, you can set it to auto. I typically specify it. The encryption that OCI dictates is 256-bit encryption and a SHA-1 hash rate algorithm. Now, one other key thing that I really do need to specify correctly, else this will not work, is the PFS key group. And this is actually somewhere found in the documentation on OCI documentations. But what this needs to be is the number 5. OCI is using the PFS key group number 5. So I'll hit save and I'll hit apply. And now if things go well, I'll go to my ipsec and I'll hit connect. And as you can see now, my OCI Phoenix is established. And if I now go to here, sometimes it takes the UI a little bit time to update. We'll click on tunnel information. There we go. status is up. So let's see if this now actually worked. Again, if I go to my instances, and I will click on Webber 1. And now if you'll see, if I actually open up my command prompt here, now if I try to ping the 10.1.1.2, I'm still not getting any responses. And that is actually because we forgot one final thing. So what I have to do is I have set up the dynamic routing gateway. The VPN tunnel is working, it's connected. But one final thing, of course, I need to do is make sure that there's actually a route in the routing table to actually route traffic to my, over the VPN, to my local environment. So I go to my VCN and I'll click on routing tables, and you will see here that I currently only had one routing rule for anything that's not on my network to route it to the internet gateway. But what we need is, besides this, we need to add another route. And I'm going to route that through the dynamic gateway. And that's 192.168.1.0/24. And that I'm going to send to my dynamic routing gateway. So I'll click on save. And now I have two rules on here. So now again, if we go back to my instance, here we go. And I'll ping it. I actually now get a response. So now I actually have a private tunnel between my OCI environment and my on-premise environment. And from my on-premise environment, using the private IP address, I can now actually ping and connect to this web server. So now let me actually open up a PuTTY session to my machine. And the great thing is here now I can actually connect to this using my private IP address, 10.1.1.2, and I'll log in. So this is now my virtual machine, the Webber 1, running in the Oracle Cloud within Phoenix, and of course I can ping something on the internet. There we go. But I can now also start pinging my local machine. So this is, for instance, one of my servers locally, and you'll see that I'm getting a response back. Now, as I said, going back to the picture here, we have now set up the entire environment. I have set up a VCN. I created manually the 3 subnets within that VCN. We created an internet gateway and a routing table that routes everything that needs to go to the internet through the internet gateway. And we modified the security list that ping commands are allowed to go through. And we've created a dynamic routing gateway with a VPN to my on-premise environment. And we set up a routing table that for anything 192.168.1 should go through the dynamic routing gateway. Finally, let me just demonstrate to you that these two things are independent of each other. So I have my virtual machine here. This is my virtual machine. And let me ping, I don't know, google.com for you. So you can see I actually have internet connectivity. And let me just duplicate this. And I will also ping a server in my own network in that environment. So I have 2 pings going on, one to a server on the public internet and one to a server in my local network. Now, if I go to my VCN, and I will see that I have my internet gateway and I have my dynamic routing gateway. If I go to my internet gateway, I can actually terminate this. I can delete this. Well, it's saying you can't delete because a route in the routing table is dependent on it. So we'll remove that route. So my internet gateway 0.0.0, save. And I now can go back to my VCN internet gateways and completely remove the internet gateway. There you go. So my VCN does not have an internet gateway anymore. There is no route to the internet anymore. Now, if I actually go to the virtual machines, you'll see that I'll reset it. I cannot ping Google anymore. My internet connectivity for anything of my virtual machines inside actually is lost. I have no more internet connectivity, but my machine can still ping my local environment. And I can also, from my local environment, still ping 10.1. What was it? I forgot what it was. Go to my instance. And I can still ping 10.1.1.2. There we go. So it really shows that these two things are independent of each other. Now, one final thing to just show, automatically I don't have to do anything for that. So we've set up the whole configuration. I've been testing from one virtual machine out of the 10.1.1 network. But as I said, the routing tables right on both sides. Anything from the rest of the network segment should also work. So if I actually now go to my second instance, my WebO2, which is running in AD2, so in a different data center, and also in a different subnet, as you can see, it runs in 10.1.2 subnet. Also, that machine, I should be able to reach from here on 1.2.2. And there we go. I have that configured as well. So that's it on how to actually set up a VPN between your OCI environment and your on-premise environment. Fairly straightforward, as long as you configure the right security algorithms for the VPN tunnel, set up the right routing tables. It's quite a breeze to very easily connect your on-premise environment securely and very then simple to use with your OCI environment that you have anywhere in the different regions around the globe. Thank you very much for listening and watching. If you want more information on how to do this, it's also fully written out on www.oc-blog.com.